You know, a lot of times Christian nationalists like to point to Scripture in an attempt to say that we ought to submit to the will of Donald Trump because it's actually the will of God. At the top of the list of the Scripture they like to use is Romans 13, in which Paul writes a letter to the Christians in Rome and tells them that they ought to submit to authority because those authority figures are appointed by God, that they ought to pay their taxes, and that they ought to generally keep quiet. Here's the thing, Paul was writing to Christians in Rome in the first century, not to us. And he was writing in a very specific context. You see, Paul thought that the world was going to end in his lifetime. He thought that Jesus was coming on back to clean everything up and to punish the Roman authorities who were oppressing his people. Spoiler alert, Paul was wrong. The world didn't end, and Jesus did not come on back. If Paul had known that his words would have been misconstrued by those in power to oppress others, he would have been horrified. This is one of the dangers of taking Scripture out of context and trying to apply it blindly to our situation. Early Christians were living under the heel of the Roman Empire. They were living under threat of oppression and persecution. That's why so many early Christians were crucified. In fact, the biblical text is one that is about loyalty to God, to love, to justice, over and against authority of an oppressive state. That's the lesson we should be learning from the biblical text.